the campaign, the CRP, the guys who break in, they're caught red-handed. The White House isn't necessarily involved, but it inevitably kind of bleeds over into the White House. Nixon has no idea about this. He's unaware of the break-in. When does Nixon find out about this, and what's his reaction?
Well, we're going to do it at two levels. The first level is, when does Nixon learn about the break-in and the arrests?
Uh-huh.
He's down in Florida, and he reads about them in the Sunday morning papers.
Wow.
And his reaction was, who would be so stupid to break in the DNC headquarters? Comes back to the White House. Bob Haldeman meets with him for the first time in front of a recording device. Remember, we learn later Nixon's recorder bugged the Oval Office. And he meets with Bob Haldeman on June 20th, 1972. There's an 18-minute gap. Haldeman's notes at that point, his famous yellow pad, has the word Watergate, nothing else. We don't know what was said because the recording device has a buzz on it. Now, we don't have to get into it because we just don't know.
Yeah.
But that's one of three most significant tapes. 3 days later, June 23rd, Haldeman comes in and says, the investigation is going in a new direction we don't want it to go. And Nixon says, well, what do you mean? He says, well, they're tracing the money. And if they trace the money, they're going to get to people we don't want to be involved. And Nixon says, well, would that be Morris Stans? That's his finance chairman at the committee. And Haldeman says, no, it's somebody else. It's Ken Dahlberg. And Nixon says, who the hell is Ken Dahlberg? He's never heard the name before. And then there's another name. We'll get it later today. Well, that particular tape recording stayed unheard, secret, until July 24th, 1974, when the Supreme Court ruled an additional 64 tapes had to be given to the prosecutors, and Nixon directed his top defense lawyer to go listen to a particular tape. Okay? June 23rd, 1972. Fred Buzhardt was the lawyer, my boss, listened to the tape, was appalled because what they hear on the tape is Haldeman saying it's John Dean's idea that the way we turn off this FBI interview is to get the CIA to tell the FBI it's one of ours, so leave them alone. Fred Buzhardt mistakenly interpreted that as meaning Nixon was in on the cover-up from day one and demanded that tape be released to the public. And it was released to the public on August 5th. Nixon announced his resignation 3 days later. So people who know something about Watergate will tell you, well, of course, Nixon was involved in the cover-up. When it became known, he resigned. Turns out, many years later, they misunderstood the tape. Now, I'm involved in this.
This is, of course, the infamous smoking gun tape you're talking about.
Absolutely. I'm the third person to hear the tape. I'm the one who prepared the transcript, and I'm the one who called it the smoking gun. And it's very nice because I'm in Woodward's book called The Final Days, and they're tracing back where that name came from, and the last person, I wouldn't talk to him, but the last person they get to is me, which is true. I called it the smoking gun, keen off of Fred Buzhardt's reaction. Well, we were wrong. They were trying to protect the identities of two very, very prominent Democrats who made substantial contributions to Nixon's reelection on the absolute assurance it would never become public. And the trouble was the FBI, in their direction, we don't want it to go, they traced the money back to CRP. They were gone anyway.
Mm-hmm.
They were starting to ask how the money got to CRP in the first place. And that would disclose these donors. So it was a political decision. But we didn't know it. The public misunderstood it. And Dean, whose idea it was, kept his mouth shut and watched it be misinterpreted. Then he published a book in 2014, 45 years later. And in a footnote at page 55, he says, funny thing, the smoking gun has been misunderstood all this time. If they really knew it wasn't illegal, it wasn't involved, and this is the end of his footnote, had Nixon known, he might have lived to fight again another day. In short, the smoking gun was shooting blanks. But that's what drove Nixon from office. That's why he resigned.
Yeah.
But he was already on the ropes. He was already on the ropes because the prosecutors had, in secret, said to the House Judiciary Committee that Nixon had personally ordered the payment of blackmail. That's on the third most important tape, March 21st, 1973. Happen to have the transcript right here. As John Dean goes in to see the president and says, Mr. President, there's a cancer near the presidency. It's growing, it's compounding, and it's getting worse. And you're going to have to make some decisions, and you don't know what I know. People have been committing perjury. More people are going to have to commit perjury, and we're being blackmailed. Meeting goes on for an hour and a half, and they sort out what the options are. And one of the options is hunker down, circle the wagons, and don't help anybody. And the other is, in the end, it's going to come out anyway. Maybe it would be better to come out now. Maybe we call the blackmail's bluff and go about it another way. And in the course of that conversation, it's an Oval Office tape. We have it. I've transcribed it. He says, how much would it cost if we started paying these guys? How much would it cost over time? Because Hunt's only asking for $120,000 now. But what about over time? And Dean says, probably exceed $1 million. And Nixon says, well, I could raise $1 million. I know where it could be found. And people are saying, well, that's his decision to pay the payment. But it's not. He goes on to say that the money's not the problem, it's the delivery. And once you start paying, there's no end. The blackmailer will never go away. They'll bleed you to death for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
And the only decision made at that meeting is to get John Mitchell down from New York, get everybody in the room, and decide what to do. John Dean himself, the president's principal accuser, has never said Nixon decided to pay the blackmail. He's never said that. And if you go through this line by line, because remember, I transcribe these things, and you look for it, he never says, let's do it. Later that day, there was another meeting. They now know Mitchell is coming. He's going to meet with them the next day. And Nixon announces his decision. You got to look for it, but it's there. The way we're going to beat Hunt's blackmail demand, because if we don't pay, he's going to disclose something. We disclose it ourselves. Then he can't blackmail us. And we're going to tell Mitchell tomorrow, that's what we're going to do. And when we tell Mitchell we're going to do that, and we do it, Mitchell will have to walk the plank, and Mitchell will be the one who takes the fall. And Nixon doesn't want to do that. But in that subsequent tape on the next day, that's what happens. Now, the prosecutors don't like that answer. They say, no. On March 21st, he decided to pay the blackmail because, and then I'll be through, because he learns about it at a meeting starting at 12:30. It ends at noon. And I'll be a son of a gun that very night at 10 o'clock, a payment is made to Howard Hunt's lawyer. So to the prosecutors, it's self-evident.
Right.
We don't have to prove anything, just follow the chain. But they can't prove it segment by segment. doesn't line up right. And so they lied about it. And I'm the one that uncovered the lies.
Yeah, this was something that the prosecutors were putting a lot of their chips on, at least up until the smoking gun tape came out, that Nixon was the one who ordered this payoff of Hunt, but you're saying that there's no proof that he did.
You have it exactly right. They didn't have anything before the smoking gun tape came out. If events had proceeded, if Nixon hadn't resigned, the fight in court or before the House Judiciary Committee would have been over what was said on March 21st and the action Nixon took after that meeting. And I think we would have won, and that Nixon would not have been found to have been involved in the cover up and be involved in the approval of that payment. And by the way, the payment was only made for Howard Hunt's legal fees. The part
Mhm.
of what he asked for, which was the blackmail part, was never paid anyway. But
Yeah,
that's lost in the wash.
that was like he asked for an additional 60,000 for living expenses or something.
Well, what he does, he asks for it, the number bounces. It's 120, 125, 130. It's 72,000 of outstanding legal bills and 50,000 prepayment of living expenses. But you see, that's what switched it from humanitarian aid to
Mhm.
blackmail. He wanted to be prepaid because his point was next Friday, I'm going to be sentenced and I'm going to be led away to prison, and my family will be at risk. My wife recently died in a plane accident. I have a special needs daughter. I want money up front because you guys don't pay on time. And he says, Hunt maintains that he never threatened blackmail. He never threatened to disclose the earlier Fielding break in. He just said, you guys aren't treating me fairly. I've spent my career with an agency that takes care of its own. What I, I was doing what you wanted me to do.